makes it work somehow. KH8 is a good move, getting out of the pin. And also removing the possibility of this being check. In Bughouse, this would not be as good of an idea because white would already have a pawn to drop on h6, but this is Crazy House, so it's hard to get that pawn. And even harder to come with follow-up material. Okay, so this is a more common placement for the bishop on move 3. So here white sort of has an extra tempo compared to the normal ones. The knight would probably go to e5, or sometimes we play knight takes d4 and then a pawn on h3. The idea that I want my knight here, so I don't want to distract this one. h6, knight takes c6, pawn takes. h6 weakens the white squares. So also, but kind of has an idea to go pawn at g7 and knight at f5 check. I don't think it works right now, but it is worth calculating. e5 as well. Sometimes if black leaves the knight here, then there after he takes bishop takes the knight at h5 fork again. Oh god. Testing. Sorry, I think I disconnected again. Okay, take, knight at h5, common place for the knight. Now knight takes f6 would look interesting. Burpcow goes for knight e4. Not so sure about this one. So obviously the intention is, or not obviously, he wants to trade queens. And then what will he do after that? He might have an idea of queen at h7, which I don't think works. Someone suggested bishop takes f7. And could work. So one of the reasons, okay, let's just look at a variation that you might think of, consider first. Queen takes, and the knight takes f6. So why is this bad? Well, because black has two knights, so he has an option to drop on h3 and f3 check. And then with the queen in hand, that's mate. So white cannot take here. Bishop takes f7 is suggested with the idea that if queen takes d1, then white can have an intermediate check on g6. And actually this is checkmate, because white gets to take on f8 with check. Okay, is my internet bad? No, mine is. I'll type that in Twitch chat. Okay. So white traded and does not take the bishop. White plays knight at f4 instead to cover h3. What's the material count, by the way? White has 3 pieces, so black has 5, and white has 7 pawns. So black's up a piece and a pawn. JannLee could actually try something interesting here. We might go like bishop at f3. And then maybe there's some knight at h3, queen at h1, bishop takes g2 things going on. Maybe pawn at f3 is better for this purpose. So let's say like pawn at f3, right? And then if white takes on h7, then knight at h3 check. White has to take with the knight. And queen at h1, king takes, pawn at g. F takes g2, takes, bishop at f3. JannLee opts for the more logical defensive approach. Burpcow takes on f7, but this allows JannLee to take on f4. So now let's calculate knight at h3 because it would be really good if it works. I actually don't think it works in this case. And why doesn't it work? Because white can go knight takes h3 and then run to h1. But actually knight at f3 works really well. So knight at f3, yeah, this should be mate. Pawn at g2. And then if white takes with the knight, we have the classic smothered mate with queen at g1. And otherwise, I can show this mate at the end of the stream. If white went king h1, knight f, then black would have still enough material to mate with two knights and a queen. So good mating pattern to know. So now burpcow plays a variation without h6, so JannLee immediately takes the opportunity to play bishop b5. This is a different line from game one. And we trade, and JannLee goes for e6. This is a very common move in chess, but in Crazy House, it feels like it might be a bit much. Although, since there's two knights, black cannot play pawn on f7 because black can actually take. However, maybe just pawn d6 is good enough here. Say, okay, you can have my queen, and I'll take a lot of more pieces. That's what he goes for, with the bishop instead of the pawn. It generally says, okay, if I take the queen, then I lose my attack. Yeah, I have a bunch of pieces around the pin. When I take this instead. So now we have similar material counters of white's down 2 pawns. G6 makes sense because this is the only way to develop the bishop. This could become vulnerable to some pawn on h6 stuff later. Yes, Opera has king h1, knight g3. Smother mate coming soon. Bishop h6, I don't like that so much. Maybe it is okay. The reason I don't like it is because it feels like unnecessary. Can wait for black to do certain things before playing that move. And now like black can play knight f5 and see sort of kicking the bishop out for free, getting a tempo off of that. And the intended bishop takes f8 doesn't even work because after rook takes f8 or king takes f8, this pawn on this f7 square is going to be defended. But that's still okay. JannLee is, I mean, the material count hasn't changed. So white still has compensation for the pawn, just to confirm whether or not black can recover. burpcow once again tries to trade off this knight. Or at least kick it from its outpost. Bishop e8 is a great move because this bishop covers both of the squares that this knight can go to, as well as the other ones. Bishop h3 is also a good defensive move. Works very well with a pawn on g2. Also aims to snap off this knight. But the bishop can just stay here the rest of the game. Rook takes c5. That's a nice move. White now wins a pawn here. Oh, actually, this bishop's attacked, so not yet. White can win a pawn this way by bishop takes f5, pawn takes, rook takes, and then if pawn takes, there's a knight at e6 now, the fork. Bishop f7, so let's look at the king coverage. So JannLee has very strong coverage. Looks sort of like a sofa. But burpcow has even more pieces. Kind of covering the various squares around this king. This might look like an ugly structure, but if you think of this as a pawn, then it's essentially like a crown with slight extension. However, it does give rise to these pawn weaknesses. So now this becomes a strong threat. Because if I capture with either pawn, then that frees up the square for me to drop a knight. Yeah, so rook takes f5 is suggested in the chat, and I think that move is, it looks nice, but I don't think it's needed yet, because white can keep up this pressure, black cannot really do anything. Although JannLee plays it immediately. Now g takes f5 would make sense, or bishop takes f4. So rook gives back a piece free, is probably afraid of knight at something on g6. We just come here, then I think that would have been fine. Okay. So now JannLee's up on material and he has a better position. So he's positionally outclassing his opponent. JannLee places a third bishop on the third rank. That's a really strong defensive setup. Normally what we see is this square, but now there's an extra row or column. Also notice that this pawn is pretty weak, so JannLee will probably drop a knight on g4 at some point just to target the pawn. It's actually really hard to defend. Also, it makes sense to drop a knight here, because this pawn is hard to defend as well. Now knight g4 seems really natural. Alternatively, you can also just win. This should be enough material to checkmate. It'd be really cool if queen at d6 was mate, but unfortunately it isn't. Knight at d6, however, should be with the idea that if you take here, then that opens up my line for queen at e7, or if he just goes here and sort of like a distracting technique. Okay, nice game by JannLee. We now have a rerun of game 5. Current score 5-1 in favor of JannLee. In theory, this should not be good for setup for black. But I think that it's good from a practical standpoint because white would not have expected or anticipated this to show up on the board. And when you don't know a variation that well, then it's pretty even for both sides, which makes it interesting to watch as well as to play. JannLee sacrifices a pawn, cutting off this bishop and activating the knight, most likely. Although it has an other alternative to move the knight to a5 to trade off for this bishop. So let's activate the knight. White can reactivate it by playing d6, but in this case, black can sack the rook on the 7 back. So it's not really worth it to give up a pawn and a knight for a rook. Okay, the pawn is used for defense on f3, but this allows black's bishop to have a really strong bishop on h5. You can't kick it. It's has flipping at f3, but it's also covering f7, so this makes this knight less strong. Yeah, in the previous game, JannLee probably saw knight f6, but just went in for the kill because you didn't even need to slow push that game. Since the knight on g5 is now rendered useless, it relocates to e4 to trade off for this knight. Attacks this bishop. However, since it was defending f3, now f3 will become a target. So it currently has the same number of defenders as attackers, and once adjusting knight at h4, I was also thinking maybe knight takes f3. Looks interesting. Okay, so JannLee goes for knight at h4. Good job, chat. So Dustin. So this does hang c5, but in return he not only gets the 2 pawns, but also an open king, which is pretty valuable in Crazy House. c3. Protecting the b2 pawn. So now, how would you continue the attack next? So I can clearly see this bishop. Actually, it looks cool, but these pawns hinder its activity along the diagonals. So that's why f3 is such a big target. If the bishop were able to go back to e2, then white would have more control through the white squares. So JannLee plays bishop at g6, which is a good rule of thumb. Whenever you're in doubt, just make the king safer. There could also be some ideas with bishop takes f3, takes, and then bishop takes e4, and then knight at h3 is check. So the way you could get to this move is sort of like, okay, if I take on h3, I would really want a knight here, so how can I get a knight? Well, I'll look at this one. JannLee opts for knight takes g2 instead. I guess bishop takes f3 doesn't work. Similar idea, right? If you take the knight, what do I want? Piece do I want? I want a knight. How do I get a knight? There's only one on the board that I can get. However, in this case, white can take back with the rook. So now white can actually play rook takes h4. So maybe this might not have been most ideal for white, but it could still make it work. Bishop takes f3, pawn e2. Oh, that was a nice image. So now JannLee sets up the very common mating idea with pawns on h3, g2, and then the rook on h1. Typically, white defends it by putting the knight on g3, but since there's a piece on g3, this is impossible. So now white defends by putting the knight on h1. So that's the other way, right? If you want to if you want to stop the opponent from putting a piece on a square, you play that square first. However, this knight is now trapped, so he'll always have a way in to like take and then drop a pawn g2, so that's why he's grabbing the pawn. Now after takes, I guess he wants queen takes h1. I don't think this will. Another idea JannLee can look at is look at f1, rook takes, take, pawn g2, which doesn't work for sure. He's brought down to 13 seconds, which either means that I disconnected again, or he's trying to find a finishing blow. So one method is to go knight at e2 check, or knight g2, and then queen g4 check to sort of cover this knight and this g7 square. So he does something similar, and now he'll be able to pick up the queen first, which gives him an advantage in that front. However, he can't really do much with a queen, so chooses to take on f3, because this threat is just too strong. So now you even have to go bishop at h5 to cover the square, so white's knight can't access it. And actually that's mate because of queen e2 mixing. Okay, 6-1 in favor of JannLee. And we're going to see the same opening again. Indeed we are. A slight twist, the knight goes to e4 first. So typically black will want to bring the bishop to f5 after that, or take on c3. Those are two options. There's also knight takes f2, but I don't think that's that good. Black will get the same amount of material. But in burpcow, this is generally, white is not really unhappy when he sees this variation. So what can white do here, right? So what does black want? Black wants to play e6, get the queen out, get the bishop out, and use these pawns to make the king safer and also target some knights or other roof squares on white's camp. Meanwhile, if white's able to consolidate, then these two pawns are going to be worth less than the knight. Because the knight can sack on f7, it can target h7, this is a strong square for it. And overall, white's relying on piece activity. Okay, white trades for another knight. This stops d4 ideas. And gives a knight still. So that knight g5 takes f7 is stronger. Yeah, I was looking at queen takes g3, pawn g2. Couldn't find anything there. But that does look good too. Can look at that after as well. Bishop at b6 is common because this is a strong bishop and will be traded off. Now this dark square feels a bit weaker. For example, bishop at e3 and bishop to c5 could be annoying in the future. Here's bishop c5 check. The problem is now white can block on d4. So sort of negates the effects. However, he sees pawn at e4 distracting the defender, which is nice. So f7 is going to be a target for white in the future. These two pawns, like potential knight drops, could harass these pawns. It's pawns defending the weak spot on f6. So since white has a few knights, knight on h5 could also support that idea. King h1 makes sense, getting out of this annoying diagonal business. After e takes, queen takes, white will threaten queen out of 7 mate. He goes rook takes because he wants to defend the bishop. Actually, no, it does not feel so good for white. Well, partly because we see black has the initiative. Unless he sacks on f7, which he could do. So there's some things you have to consider when you go up the rook. One, I'm going to make sure that black won't be able to use the rook afterwards. I'm going to see a JannLee queen sack. Bishop at h5 makes no sense here. No, very much. So burpcow has one knight. Can't do a lot by itself. Use it to trade for a rook. With the lack of pieces, black also doesn't want to play g6. It might look scary, but there's always this escape route for the king to c8, where it will be very safe. Or will it? Yeah, it will. On d7, might have to worry about pawn at e5 ideas. Trying to get into the light squares, but you can see this is a really strong mass around the queen side, so the black king were on either of these squares, I would feel decently safe. The only problem is black will not have much of an attack to go off of. Oh, interesting. Okay, I'll definitely look at that game. Takes on there, tries to defend against the mate part. JannLee will probably take drop rook here. Goes with the 5. That looks bad. He can now have, he has an e6 idea now. This could be really dangerous for black. So now I see the f7 squares open. You obviously don't want the king to run back here. Actually, we're okay with it because we have bishop e8 takes c6. So king e7 is what he does. Trying to get the knight white to spend the knight on g8, which I actually feel like he could have done that. So now this knight puts off the king's escape square and threatens knight at g8. And while black has two queens, it simply does not have enough material to get it. Doesn't have enough time. Queen d6. No. Oh, maybe something at ch, like knight at ch check might have been cool. Not now, though. Yeah, so white takes this to get rid of the defender of e8. Now I drop to rook here, and then knight f6 is mate. Very nice. Now the score is 7-1 in favor of JannLee. If he scores one more point, he'll do better than his previous result. Okay, we have an early f6. What are we? The first thing Crazy House or Buckhouse, never play f6. Well, why can we do it in Crazy House? Because white does not have pieces to drop. f7, e6, etc. I mean, burpcow's mentality could be affected by that one game where JannLee hung an anti-pre move, or not an anti-pre move, just it's hung straight up hung a piece in the opening, and like the first 5 moves is still won.